Coming up on today's show, Kathy Labriola is a nurse, counselor, and hypnotherapist in Berkeley, California. She has provided affordable mental health services to alternative communities for the past 30 years. She has been a card-carrying bisexual polyamorist for 50 years. Kathy is author of Love and Abundance, a counselor's advice on open relationships, the Jealousy Workbook, the Polyamory Break-up Book, Causes, Prevention, and Survival, and her new book, Polyamorous Elders, Aging in Open Relationships. She is extra crunchy and lives in a housing cooperative, rides a bicycle, and raises chickens and organic vegetables.
Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Chambliss.
Coming up on today's show, my conversation with Kathy Labriola. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am absolutely delighted to be here again with Kathy Labriola, my friend, my colleague. Love having you on, Kathy. So thanks for making the time. And we're here partly to touch on your second edition of Love and Abundance, a counselor's advice on open relationships. Your first edition was out in 2008, and this one just came out. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself in your own words, in case anybody's maybe not that familiar with your work.
My name's Kathy Labriola, and I'm in private practice doing counseling and hypnosis in Berkeley, California. And I am a very long time, over 50 years, polyamorist, and really excited about being here on your show.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. I love that. I think this might be maybe your third time or so, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. This is my fifth book, and I've been on your show at least 3 times to talk about those books.
That's amazing. Yeah. And thank you for all the work that you do. Before we started officially recording, we're recording this around the holidays, 2024. I thought it might be interesting just to talk about, you mentioned the term poly-holiday crisis, might have been how you said it. And I'd love it if, for anybody who might relate to that, I'd love it if you maybe share a little bit what you view that as or how that can show up.
Well, I have a pamphlet that I wrote a number of years ago called The Dreaded Poly Holidays, because so many people who are in polyamorous relationships do start dreading the holidays each year, months in advance, because of the various problems that can occur. It sometimes boils down to you can't be in more than one place on Hanukkah or the winter solstice, or Christmas Eve, or Christmas Day, or New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day, or any of the other holidays that you might celebrate, like Thanksgiving, or Kwanzaa, or any number of other holidays that seem to occur around the winter time. So it often comes down to, I feel you don't love me because you spent Thanksgiving with the other partner, or I feel like you're deprioritizing me because you took the other partner home for Christmas to meet your family, and you haven't taken me home for Christmas to meet your family, or etc. So it often comes down to people giving a certain amount of meaning and significance to these holidays, which for some people, they don't have that meaning or significance. So, and for some people, they mean something different. So it is really important for people to talk about these holidays as far in advance as possible to find out what each of your partners may want or need around these holiday celebrations, or gift giving, or other things that may have meaning for them and may have a different meaning for you, or no meaning at all. And you may end up making a partner feel very excluded or very hurt or unloved through no fault of your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for touching on that. I didn't know that you wrote a pamphlet about that. That's so interesting. And I love how you mentioned it can be noticing like what's the meaning that we're giving to a situation or meaning around the holidays, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all may celebrate holidays in different ways. So I love just your recommendation to maybe just talk about what is each person needing? What is each person's expectations? How can we, maybe to add on to that, how can we maybe brainstorm, together? How can we get creative so that everybody's getting their needs met? So, is there any other piece of advice or wisdom that you might share around creating some peace around those various holidays that can come up?
Well, many people try to solve this by saying, well, we'll all spend Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever together. Mm-hmm. But that may not work for a lot of people. Some people, that's going to ruin their holiday completely or make them very, very uncomfortable. So it's important to check that out. Is that a way that everyone can feel included, or will it just make everyone feel equally miserable? And some people will try to solve it by saying, well, let's spend Christmas Eve together, and then I'll spend Christmas Day with the other partner, or I'll spend part of each holiday with each partner. For some people, that works great, the sort of compartmentalized holiday. But for others, it just makes them feel like they're just being squeezed into a very short, like couple hours, and feeling really unimportant or deprioritized. So it is important to find out, does your partner really want to spend at least part of each holiday with you, or would they rather have one holiday just all to themselves with you and skip the other holiday?
That's fair. That's fair. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important because I also there's other reasons why the holidays can be hard. Like for me, both my parents aren't here anymore. Like we were talking about, we are some of the older folk within the polyamorous community. And so that can bring up happy feelings of nostalgia, but it can also bring up some sadness. And I don't have children, so that can bring up different things for me as well. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why the holidays can be hard. So add in multiple relationships, and that just adds another element to navigate. So I really appreciate you touching on that, so that people can also feel really heard and validated and seen by our conversation here. So thank you for that. I'd love to go back to now talking about your book. So I'd love to understand, like, maybe what was the decision or the light bulb moment of why you realized, oh my goodness, I actually think I need to write a second edition of Love and Abundance, a counselor's advice on open relationships. What was that moment that you had when you realized that was work that you needed to do and that you wanted to do?
Probably when I got the possibly maybe 450th email. But I got somewhere around 450 or 500 emails over the past 3 or 4 years from people that are angry that the book didn't cover certain things.
Wow.
And apparently all of those folks who wrote me about it were young people who didn't know that those things weren't invented when the book was written. And believe that I'm a complete moron because I somehow didn't know anything about, say, relationship anarchy. But, the book was written in 2008, and that was invented, or the term was invented in 2012. So, for instance, many people wrote me with excellent and accurate critiques of my use in the book of seeing gender as somewhat binary, because when I wrote the book, it was really before the term non-binary had been invented, before anyone really was using they, them pronouns. At the time that I wrote the book initially, there were certainly many transgender individuals and people that I was seeing in my practice, but at that time, and people who were trans tended to be F to M or M to F. They tended to be people who were assigned male at birth who were transitioning to female, or people that were assigned male at birth who were transitioning, who were female assigned at birth and were transitioning to male. So there was really not an understanding of gender as being much more non-binary, and that term wasn't in use yet. So I did receive lots of accurate critiques from people about that, but apparently not realizing that during that era, it was a very different understanding that was prevalent in society around gender. And that's changed quite a bit. And so that really needed an update. Mm-hmm. For instance, I have a full chapter about women and polyamory that was more predicated on the idea of gender being more binary. However, misogyny and sexism and oppression of women is still highly operational in society, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So that part of it and how that affects women in polyamory is still quite accurate. Unfortunately, that couldn't be updated.
Oh man, you really brought it home there. That got me in the feels. But just to go back a moment, it's interesting how we have a custom that when we produce a book, that in little teeny weeny print, it says, when the book was written. It almost seems like that should be bigger, but it's not tradition to do that, because I wonder if some of those young people might see that, oh, it was written a long time ago, almost 20 years ago. But it's interesting because
prehistoric times.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to me personally because I am a former cheater. I think you know that. And I'm 55 now. I graduated college in 1992. Was cheating that whole time, cheated all through the 90s. And I didn't understand the word polyamory wasn't invented yet even. Well, I guess it was technically, but I hadn't heard of it. And I wasn't familiar with open relationships during that whole period. And so I ended up meeting my husband in 2003. We got married in 2006. Your book came out 2 years after that. And that was almost around the same time that I read The Ethical Slut for the very first time. So that's when I first learned the word polyamory. So even for me, your book came out when I just had what's polyamory? I just heard this word, and of course, you were ahead of me and all of that. So I think that's really, really interesting. And to think about all that has happened since then is really powerful to think about. And also sad to go back to your other point that misogyny is still going strong.
And maybe getting worse. We may be heading towards the Handmaid's Tale territory with our next presidential administration.
Yes, and that is quite scary. We are recording this in December of 2024 after the election. So we shall see what happens in the next 4 years with the president-elect and that administration, to your point. So from your viewpoint, since you have a different vantage point than I do, would you say that how women in general are treated in the world and in relationships, do you think that's more or less been... how do you think that has changed or not changed since you wrote the first edition?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think there's been much improvement in the way women are treated as second-class citizens. We still make a lot less money. We still struggle with having to try to protect ourselves from rape and sexual assault. At least there's been more of a consciousness being raised around sexual assault in recent years with the Me Too movement and, people really raising our consciousness about that and really trying to hold at least some perpetrators more accountable for their assaults on women. But if there has been any change within the polyamorous world around women in relationships, it would be that my experience is that women are becoming more assertive about taking control of their relationships and insisting on more equality within their polyamorous relationships. They're not as likely to allow, if they're in heterosexual relationships, they're not nearly as likely to allow men to gaslight them about what's going on in their polyamorous relationships. And they're more likely to speak up and say, this is not what I agreed to. These are not, you're breaking agreements that you've made. I expect to be treated with respect and for you to keep any agreements that you make. Of course, that's not to say that women don't break agreements sometimes too, and that women don't behave badly in poly relationships. I've certainly seen a lot of that. But in the past, it was much more likely that a woman would give a man too much power in the relationship to set the terms of the agreement, of how the relationship was going to go, and often break agreements, and a woman would accept that. I think now women are more likely to feel, I'm not going to put up with that, and we have to have an egalitarian relationship.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely am in alignment with what you said there. There's a term or two I'm going to mention, and I don't know if it's mentioned in your book or not, or if it wasn't a term that was around during the first edition in 2008, but now it is. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about when I say the term one penis policy or one vagina policy. Like, do you see that a lot in your work? And do you think that's either gotten worse or better? And for our listeners, I'll let you explain it because I'm here to interview you. Do you mind giving a quick explanation of giving an example of what we sometimes hear called one penis policy?
Yes, that practice was around long before the term was invented. And I don't know when the term was invented, but it definitely was after 2008. The one penis policy refers to a heterosexual couple where there's a heterosexual man and a bisexual woman, and the man dictates that the woman can have sex and relationships with other women, but not with any other man. And so it's a setup for inequality, that the man gets to have sexual partners that match his sexual orientation, but the woman doesn't. She only gets to have sexual partners that match part of her sexual orientation. And it's a misogynist policy on two fronts. One is, the man gets more power and gets to have what he wants, and the woman doesn't. But it's on the second front, it betrays a really lack of understanding on the man's part of the power of lesbian sexuality and the power of women's sexuality. And because the man in that setting, his belief is that his partner having a sexual or romantic relationship with other women is not a threat to their relationship. It's predicated on his belief that his partner is having some kind of relationship with women, with another woman or women, but that is some kind of weak, diluted version of sexuality. And it's not as powerful or as threatening as if she were having a sexual or romantic relationship with another man. And it's kind of laughable, really, because a bisexual woman is just as likely to leave you for another woman, maybe more so, than for another man. And that other relationship or relationships you're having with women are very powerful. The power of female eroticism and lesbian sexuality is just as powerful, if not more so, than the sexuality a woman shares with a man. But It's just that the man believes that if there's no penis involved, it's not really sex.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for your insightful and multifaceted definition of that. And I don't know about you. I'd love to hear from your standpoint, but in my work, I would say I see that angle, of one penis policy maybe 4 or 5 times more than kind of what we might call like one vagina policy. It tends to that tends to show up way more. But like you said, I've still seen it in the other direction as well. Would you say that is similar to what you maybe have seen in your clients in terms of occurrences, or how prevalent that is?
Yes, there's it's probably more like 99 out of 100 rather than 4 out of 5. But, having said that, I mean, there is nothing wrong with a woman agreeing to the one penis policy if that is something that she wants. And, a lot of women will say, well, what do I need another man for? I've got this guy. What I really need is a relationship with a woman. That's what I'm missing. That's what I really need, want, and I'm missing out on. So yeah, I want to do that. And so it's a choice that works for her. And I've even heard some women say, well, I need another man like I need a hole in it. This is like, one man is more than enough trouble for me,
Right.
So, and I don't mean that in any way to disrespect men. It's just, for some women, what they really need, want, and see as missing in their lives is a relationship with a woman. So they really want to focus any other energy they have for relationships on finding and sustaining a long-term committed relationship with another woman, or just in finding and having relationships, whether more casual, secondary, or primary with another woman, or series of women, whatever it is that they're seeking. It's not about seeking something with another man. So it's a matter of choice and agency. A woman having agency and control over her own body and her own sexuality. However, there are some women who practice polyandry and practice being a dominant female with 2 or more males. And usually that's a DS situation where, she's the dominant and the men are submissive. So there's nothing wrong with that, again, if it's something that is chosen and that is really works for everyone.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I really appreciate that. So I'd love to just in general go back to talking about what would you say are we've touched on a couple already, but what would you say are some of the differences between the first edition of Love and Abundance and the way the world has changed, and then that was then reflected in the second edition, which came out in 2024? Is that right?
About 3 weeks ago. Yes.
Nice. Congratulations.
Beginning of December 2024. Yes. Well, one of the biggest is that there's been a further expansion or delineation of different models of consensual non-monogamy or polyamory. And, this is a good thing that more people are developing more sort of nuances on how to do non-monogamy in a way that works ideally for them. And so 2 of the models that have been much more further developed are what's now called relationship anarchy and what's now called solo poly. Those models always existed and were always practiced by some percentage of people who were doing open relationships or non-monogamous relationships. But they've been further defined and identified, and relationship anarchy was invented around 2012 as far as the title, the name. And it's a very confusing title, and I actually think it's I wish I wish somebody would invent a different title, because it doesn't really seem like the practice of it is how it actually is, how it sounds. It mainly would be defined as allowing every relationship to rise to its own level that it would naturally, organically evolve to, rather than having a preset idea that, okay, one person is going to be primary, everyone else has to be secondary, or being on the so-called relationship escalator. Relationship anarchy is a completely throwing overboard the whole concept of a relationship escalator, where you're starting with dating and you're getting more serious, you're getting more committed, you're going to move in together, get married, etc. All those things. It's not that people in the relationship anarchy model can never do those things or will never do those things. It just means you're not on that path, and you're just allowing a relationship to become whatever it seems like it's going to work for each person in it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can work. Other times it could be disastrous for everyone involved. So I'm not promoting this model as an ideal model. I'm just trying to explain what it is and what it's trying to do. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't work, it's usually because most people seem to really need and want more predictability in their lives than this model can offer. Most people need and want more security that this model really offers, because if you get involved in a relationship with someone, they're not promising you anything. They're not even promising you a date this Saturday night, much less like a lifetime of commitment. So it really requires people who are very self-confident and have really good boundaries and really feel secure within themselves and are not seeking that security and commitment in relationships, that are able to be very flexible as relationships change and evolve. And for people who can deliver on those kind of qualities and can be that flexible and manage that level of uncertainty in their lives, it can be incredibly rewarding and satisfying, because you're just really opening yourself up to whatever life and love are bringing in your direction.
Beautifully expressed. Thank you for that. And how about, you mentioned solo polyamory. When do you think that term kind of started getting thrown around, or when do you think that was invented?
Right around the same time. And it was somewhat invented by some of the same people that were promoting the relationship anarchy model. Before that, around like 2012, anytime before that, we used to just describe that as the multiple non-primary partners model, which just was solo poly is probably a better description than what we used to use. So it's probably that term's probably an improvement on the past. All it means is that you're not currently seeking a committed life partnership. What you're currently seeking is more than one partner, but you're seeing yourself as single and wanting to really be a single person rather than part of a couple. But within being solo poly, you can, develop deep and loving and longer term relationships with people. You're just more wanting to see yourself as single, and you're more likely to be living alone or living, with roommates or in a communal or collective situation. You're not seeing romantic partnership as the center of your life and family.
Fair. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate just the nuances that you bring to the conversation.
And some people who are, sorry to interrupt you.
I know, that's okay.
Who are in the solo poly model are seeing it as a long-term life path. that this is who they are. I'm single and I don't really want marriage or, cohabiting with someone, with one or more persons. What I'm really looking for is more of a single life, and to focus on something else, my career or community or something else. But for some people, they're seeing it as a more temporary thing, like they've just gotten out of a long-term marriage, or they're going through a crisis in their own life, or going through a death of a parent, or some other really, they just don't feel at this time open to a committed partnership, but they see themselves maybe going in that direction in the future, or they're very committed to, like they're getting their PhD right now, or committed to something else that doesn't give them the space to really commit to a partnership.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't thought about that. That a lot of times people will say, "I'm solo polyamory," or my kids are my primary. Kind of thinking of it that way. Galileo, you brought up that if somebody's maybe going to get a PhD, like that endeavor is their primary, so to speak, or like their main focus. And that might be why they're identifying as a solo polyamorous, or, so I thank you for that distinction. It's interesting that both of those terms came out roughly around 2012. Because again, when I'm thinking along my timeline, I actually started my blog, Loving Without Boundaries, in 2012. It was December of 2012.
Oh, interesting.
And I partly came up with the term Loving Without Boundaries because Love Without Limits was taken by Deborah Anapol. And I had no idea I was about to create a coaching business and a mission out of this. I just thought I was starting a blog, but that's partly how I came up with the term Loving Without Boundaries, just meaning expansive love in that way. But when I started sharing my blog, I definitely got a lot of flack at that time, and people weren't familiar with the term polyamory or open relationships that much, and I got called lots of nasty names, like a slut and a whore, and you're breaking the values of the family system. Why are you married? Shut up, And so I'd love to just ask, what was some of the differences that you've seen from when your first edition came out, and maybe how that was received versus the world that we live in now in 2024 when we're recording this, December of 2024.
Well, yeah, when the first edition came out, I was on a lot of radio interviews because podcasts hadn't really, taken off at that point. They were just kind of getting going. And so I was on a lot of radio shows, and the internet radio thing had just started, but mostly it was regular, airwaves radio shows. And so it was much more conservative people that were not oriented toward this and didn't have a clue what it was all about. And I used to have to spend the first half of each interview explaining what an open relationship is, what polyamory is, and having to try to explain how they all believed that it was like the same as polygamy, and they were, conflating it with that and saying, well, gosh, that's the same as, these young underage girls being sold into marriage with men who are, twice their age and have 4 wives. And, kept trying to have to explain the difference, there between those two very different things. So that was very different. And yes, I did get accused a lot of the, trying to undermine marriage and the family and destroy Western civilization. And we only wish we had this kind of power in the universe, but we don't. I mean, anyway, it's just amazing how frightened, people are of anything a little bit different in the world of relationships and sex, and just very. And now with this new edition, clearly, there's lots of different poly podcasts, lots of poly blogs. There's, lots of, even in the mainstream media, like the New York Times and other places like that, people are writing articles about polyamory and consensual non-monogamy. Clearly, it's well within the more in the public sphere than it was then. I much less often have to explain what polyamory is to someone now.
What's fascinating, I find too, is even in the last year or two, with all the media coverage and everything that you said, and the work that you do, the work that I do, and many of our colleagues in this space, I am still shocked when I sometimes am still coming out to various people, about who I am and how I live my life. And sometimes people that I really admire, they're highly intelligent, still haven't heard the word polyamory, which is surprising. But now they are. They're the unusual ones, whereas before, nobody really understood the word. But they still are out there. There are some people that still aren't familiar with that term, but usually they're familiar with the term open relationship or open marriage. But I don't know if you know this. Even in this year, it was January of 2024. Were you aware that I got written up alongside? I'm not going to remember her name right at this moment, but she's one of the memoirs that was written in the Wall Street Journal. Did you see this?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Molly Rodden-Winter, I think that's
Molly. That's right. Yeah, I've seen her book. Yeah.
Yeah, she's been on the podcast too, but she and I were written in this same article in the Wall Street Journal, which then got seen by Axios DC here in Washington, DC. So then I was in another article here in Washington, DC. So it's funny that you bring that up, because 2024 was a very interesting year for media coverage for both those memoirs or people who are being outspoken or in the news, so to speak. So yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that.
But you're right, even in the last 2 years, there's been kind of an explosion of books and articles but I mentioned in the book that I had to write a whole new bibliography for this book. Because when I wrote the first book, I had a bibliography that was like 1 page or something long. And, so many books have been written, especially from 2021 to 2024. Tons of new books on polyamory and open relationships. And there's been an explosion as well of articles in academic and scholarly journal that the academics and scholars have really jumped into the act with doing lots of, really rigorous research studies. There's a lot of data now, which did not exist even a few years ago.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And I'm honored to be a part of one of those different organizations that's gathering some of that data, which I saw you mentioned in the book, the American Psychological Association Committee on Consensual Non-monogamy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've been able to compile some of those statistics, such as the one many people have maybe heard by now, which is that 1 in 5 people will practice some form of an open relationship within their lifetime. And the other statistic that I've heard, I believe, from them is that about 5% of people, say in the United States, or maybe it's North America, are actively stating that they're practicing some form of an open relationship now. And of course, those numbers could even be slightly bigger because some people won't admit it, right? Right. So that's interesting. But, 5% is actually quite a big number, and I still believe that number is going to continue to increase as time goes on.
Yes, it is really interesting that what I'm hoping someone will do more research on is, why is it that 20% of people have practiced polyamory at some point in their lives for some period of time? And I think the researchers that did those studies said that it had to be for at least a few years to, for them to count that person in that 20%. But only 5% are practicing it as a long-term relational lifestyle or relational practice. So, it's interesting that, 20% try it, and it's the only 5% are doing it long-term. I'm sure it's a bigger percentage, but that's the ones that are stating it openly. And there are a number of studies of the United States and a number of studies in Canada. And so I don't know anything about the rest of North America, like in Mexico or anything, but the studies,
you're right.
The studies for the U.S. and the studies for Canada are pretty consistent, somewhere between 5 and 6% as a kind of long-term, lifelong relational practice.
And what's interesting about that, I think, is two more interesting statistics alongside that, which is that obviously we all know the general stat about how about roughly half of marriages end in divorce. But the last stat that I saw was that 30 to 40% are due to infidelity. So, that 5% we're talking about, that's consensual non-monogamy, right? That doesn't mean that people aren't practicing non-monogamy, but a lot of people are not doing it above board, right? Because that's obviously been going on since the beginning of time when we could, have language around it, right? But the other stat that I find interesting is we're all familiar with the topic of gay rights and gay marriage for same-sex marriage and all of that, and the LGBTQ plus community. And I've heard that the percentage of people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community is actually less than 5%. So we hear about that all the time. And I am glad that we're finally hearing more about polyamory and open relationships. But it's just interesting to look at it through that lens too, that there's actually more people openly stating that they're practicing some form of an open relationship than we have numbers of people in the LGBTQ plus community. Have you heard that stat before as well?
Yeah, it's a puzzling statistic. It really is puzzling, and I can't believe it's actually correct because
I'm not sure either, but that's what
I mean, for many, for decades, the statistics were saying that at least 10% of the population are, LGBT. And it's in recent years, they're saying it's only 5%. I don't know what happened to that other 5%, but even that 10% seemed very low to me because, in my experience, there's only a small percentage of people that are like 100% straight, and there are only a small percentage of people that are like 100% gay.
Yeah.
And, the majority of people are somewhere in between on that spectrum. That Kinsey scale of 0 to 6, 0 is straight, 6 is gay. Most people are somewhere in that 1 to 5, So I don't even know how they come up with those numbers about how many people are queer. And it certainly doesn't match with my personal experience out in the world.
That's fair. Thank you for sharing that. And who knows how they come up with those different statistics, but I think it's fair to also cast some doubt on them and base it also on your own personal experience. So thanks for sharing that. I'd love to just touch on what is the difference in maybe how we talk about sex addiction from the first edition came out in 2008 versus now that maybe you did touch on in your book.
Well, when I first wrote the book, everywhere I went, whether it was interviews or just people who were talking to me in general about polyamory, there was a very strong belief on the part of the more traditional or straight world that polyamorists were just a bunch of freaking sex addicts, and that, we were just pathologically oriented towards wanting to have sex with multiple partners, or that was a compulsive and addictive behavior. And on the other hand, a lot of people I knew that were polyamorous didn't believe there was even such a thing as sex addiction. And so I felt compelled to address it and wrote a chapter in the first edition explaining that, yes, sex addiction is a real thing. Some people have such an unhealthy relationship with sex and such a compulsion to have sex that they behave in very much the same way alcoholics behave with alcohol and that drug addicts behave with drugs, in that they make very bad decisions because of their compulsive desires and kind of the way they are relating to sex. Just as, an alcoholic might drink and get in a car and run over someone in their car. Someone who has compulsive behaviors around sex is going to lie, cheat, and break agreements and harm people in their sexual and romantic relationships. So in that regard, there are a lot of similarities. And so when I first wrote the book, I was trying to help people, be able to identify, do you have some unhealthy behaviors around sex and you're masquerading as a polyamorist when really you're addicted and some therapy or some help, to manage and change your behaviors and your attitudes. Or are you just a sex maniac like me and just have a healthy enthusiasm for sex and relationships, and you're, treating people lovingly and respectfully around it and not harming yourself or anyone else. So I was trying to help people be able to figure out whether they have a tendency towards compulsive sexual behavior or whether they're in a relationship with someone who has that problem, and how can you avoid, if you're polyamorous, you really need to learn to avoid people who have those issues, because they are not likely to be appropriate relationship partners, and they're likely to cause you a lot of misery. So how can you avoid that? So since then, however, a number of therapists have been able to develop a much more nuanced approach to this, and that is specifically oriented toward polyamorous people who are in non-monogamous relationships, so that it is more sex positive and more polyamory positive. And they have developed this approach that is not seeing it as an addiction, but just seeing it more as some unhealthy ways of relating to sex and relating to relationships, and how you could shift those behaviors and beliefs, and that they believe that calling it sex addiction is shaming people rather than giving them tools in order to improve their lives and their relationships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I really honor everything that you shared there, and that also aligns with a lot of the work that I've seen, in the sense of sometimes people come to me when they are looking to have a healthy polyamorous or open relationship, and they went to a therapist who wanted to slap a label that they were a sex addict on them, when they didn't have some of the other things you were talking about, like they weren't making really bad decisions or it wasn't ruining their life. They simply were, like, as you said, a sex enthusiast. I love that. But there was a sense of, like you said, shaming them or causing them to feel badly for how they wanted to move through the world. So I really appreciate that distinction, and I'm glad that you brought it up in your book as well. Well, we can start to wrap it up here, but is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with, or any question that I didn't ask you that you'd like to touch on before we start to close out?
Just to say that it's like really good news that things have changed in so many positive ways. That's the good news. That is, part of the reason that I had to write the update of this book, that things have changed so much, mostly in a positive way, that polyamory is just so much more out there in the public knowledge. It's out there in the public domain. People know about it. People are practicing it, and more openly. Even more importantly, people feel freer to be out of the closet than ever before, instead of feeling frightened of telling anyone about their lives, feeling they have to hide everything about their romantic lives.
Yeah, that's I love ending on that positive note. That is a beautiful way to close out our interview. And you're also the last podcast interview of the year for me, so a nice way for me to close out the year. So thanks for bringing in the podcast caboose. And when we're talking about the timeline, this podcast I did create in 2015. Wow. Yes, that was an earlier time period. And one quick anecdote that you'll appreciate is when our pandemic, we were starting to get to a better place. I want to say it was 2021. I went to a gathering of kind of a sex positive open relationship podcasts. Like we were all at a gathering, and as I was talking to people, they were like, "Who, where's your partner that does your podcast with you?" And I was like, "Oh, I do it by myself. I host it on my own." They were like, "Really? You do it all by yourself?" And I was like, "Yes." And they were like, "When did you start it?" And I said, "Oh, back in 2015. I have 200 episodes." And they were like, "What? You started in 2015 and there are 200 episodes?" And eventually somebody called me an OG. And and at the time I was like, "What's an OG?"
Gee, yeah, that's so great.
And then when I understood what it meant, for our listeners, can you share what that means? I'm actually trying to remember what it stands for, but
Just the old gangster. And it's like you're the old gangster of poly podcasts and poly blogs. That's something you're an OG of too. It was an original gangster. I'm saying the wrong title. Original.
that's okay. Original gangster. So when I learned what it meant, I was like, "Check me out! I'm an OG." So I started kind of proudly wearing that badge. And you certainly are a major, awesome, original gangster too, Kathy Labriola. Thank you. So it's an absolute honor to know you, to speak to you, to have you on our podcast multiple times, to call you a friend and a colleague. Just really, you help pave the way for all of us, including me. So just really want to tip my hat to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, we're some of the originals
Oh my God. We are some of the originals
of the Poly Gang. Thanks for joining the Poly Gang.
Exactly. Yes. And it was a relief to me over the course of my life to realize that I didn't have to be in secrecy and shame and guilt and cheating. There was another way. And so once I had that epiphany, that's partly why I started the blog and the podcast and wrote my book in 2017, since we're kind of looking at timelines, to get the word out. Like, hey, guess what? And that's what you've been doing too. Like, there are healthy ways to live your best life and to be authentic and to be sex positive and to be inclusive, all of those things. So just thank you again. Oh, and where can people find you and your work, Kathy?
I am at www.kathylabriola.com. I'm such an oldster that I still use the www before. That's how old I am. And yes, people can buy my books there, or you can buy my books from indiebound.org or bookshop.org.
How awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathy. You were just a delight, and I appreciate all the work that you do.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun being here.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships, while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.